Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about gardening, botanical history, and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is May 26th. Today we celebrate a French botanist who broke the news to the scientific community in Paris that plants have sex. And we'll also learn about a German botanist who settled in Kodiak, Alaska, and created a fascinating look at Alaskan plants through the eyes of the native people of Alaska. We'll hear an excerpt about Lily of the Valley from one of my favorite modern writers. And we grow that garden library today with a book about houseplants and how to incorporate them into your home, your life, and your happiness. And then we'll wrap things up with the birthday of a poet who wrote some beautiful verses inspired by nature. Full show today. It's time for today's curated news. Today's curated news is a fun one for any of you who are thinking about changing careers or incorporating a new element into this next phase of your life, wherever you are, maybe becoming a garden designer. Well, if that's the case, then you will enjoy this profile of a garden designer named Grace Rogers. This is a post that was featured in The English Garden. It was written by Phoebe Jays back in August during the pandemic in 2020. And the title of the post is Career Changers: How to Become a Garden Designer. Now, in this piece, I think it's fantastic. We get to take a look at a woman who was interested in flowers. She trained as a florist and then decided later on to become a garden designer. It's a fascinating little look. I myself have been thinking that after the kids leave the house, it might be fun to go work in a flower shop. Just something to do. I've always wanted to learn more about some of the techniques that the florists use, and of course, more about the cut flowers that they use in the industry. So we'll see if that happens. But in the meantime, if you have any interest along those lines of becoming either a florist or a garden designer, you'll definitely want to check out this little profile on Grace Rogers. Now, let me give you just a quick overview of her experience. Grace started out working in architecture, then she went into floristry, and then while she was working as a florist in Chelsea, of course, she bumps elbows with someone who was a Chelsea flower show designer, of course. And so that experience inspired her to become a garden designer. And so what she did is she took an online course in garden design and she immediately fell in love with it. She did this back in 2018 and she's never looked back. In fact, you can see some of her designs in this article, so you can get a feel for how Grace approaches garden. As for Grace, she was asked if she had a favorite garden, and she said, "A standout garden for me is Great Dixter." That's her favorite garden. And I love knowing those little tidbits about people. So if you haven't visited Great Dixter, add it to your to-do list if you're in England. And if you haven't gone to England yet to see Great Dixter, you're definitely going to want to stop by and see it. I know it's on my bucket list as well. All right, now if you would like to read this post about Grace, about her experience transitioning into the field of garden design, all you need to do is head on over to the Facebook group for the show, search for the word designer, and then this post about Grace will pop up and you can read about her professional journey into garden design. Now, if you're not in the Facebook group for the show, don't sweat it. You can join at any time. I hope to see you in the group. And you know, what better time to join the group than right now when we're all sharing pictures of our gardens? I would love to see your garden. So join the group. What you need to do is head on up to the search bar. The next time you're in Facebook, search for Daily Gardener Community and then request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. It's time for today's botanical history. Here's botanical history for today, May 26th. Today is the birthday of the French botanist Sébastien Vaillant, who was born on this day, May 26th, in 1669. Appointed to the King's Garden in Paris, Sébastien loved organizing and cataloging plants. And biographical accounts say that Sébastien showed a passion for plants from the tender age of 5. His masterpiece, 40 Years in the Making, Botanicon Parisiense, was a book about the flora of Paris. It wasn't published until 5 years after his death. Today, Sébastien Vaillant is credited for acknowledging the importance of the sexual anatomy of plants. And Sébastien's work on plant sexuality inspired generations of botanists and set the stage for Linnaeus to develop his sexual system of plant classification. Linnaeus used the male stamens to determine the class and the female pistils to determine the order. And like Sébastien, Linnaeus often compared plant sexuality to that of humans. Check this out. Linnaeus wrote, "Love even seizes plants. Males, females, even the hermaphrodites hold their nuptials," which is what I now intend to discuss. Well, you can imagine how incredibly salacious it was when Sébastien broached this topic a generation before Linnaeus. Sébastien knew he would cause a sensation when he presented his work on plant sexuality at the Royal Garden in Paris on June 10th, 1717. He began by reinforcing the idea that the flower is the most important part of a plant, essential to reproduction, and then he began to lead his scientific colleagues down a path they had never thought to follow. His lecture was titled "Lecture on the Structure of the Flowers, Their Differences, and the Use of Their Parts." Today, we can imagine the reaction of his 600-person audience as he began to use fairly explicit language through the lens of human sexuality to describe the sex lives of plants, and at 6 in the morning, no less. And it's worth noting that prior to Sébastien's lecture, the topic of sex in the plant world had only been touched on lightly, allowing flowers and blossoms to maintain their reputation as pure, sweet, and innocent. Well, as I already mentioned, Sébastien was no fool. He knew that his lecture would cause a stir. And in a first ever 2002 translation of his speech presented in a journal of botanical history known as Huntia, Sébastien began his lecture by acknowledging that he was going to talk about plant sexuality very explicitly. He said, "Perhaps the language I'm going to use for this purpose will seem a little novel for botany. But since it will be filled with terminology that is perfectly proper for the use of the parts that I intend to expose, I believe it will be more comprehensible than the old-fashioned terminology, which is crammed with incorrect and ambiguous terms, better suited for confusing the subject than for shedding light on it." Well, I have to say that I've read through all of Sébastien's lecture, and it was very direct, but it wasn't all scandal. Sébastien's discussion of plant embryos was actually rather poetic, and the shapes that he's referencing in this passage are the shapes of the pollen grains. Sébastien remarked, "Who can imagine that a prism with 4 faces becomes a pansy, a narrow roll, the borage, a kidney, the daffodil, that a cross can metamorphose into a maple, that two crystal balls intimately glued to each other can become comfrey. These are nevertheless the shapes favored in these diverse plants by their lowly little embryos. Isn't that sweet? Well, today, Sébastien Vaillant is especially remembered for his work with the male and female pistachio tree. And he used the pistachio to demonstrate pollination and how sex worked in the plant world. At the time of Sébastien's work, the pistachio was growing in the King's Garden in France, and somehow it managed to survive the harsh winters of Paris. The slow-growing pistachio tree is a deciduous and dioecious tree. This means that a pistachio tree can only have male flowers or female flowers, and only the female pistachio trees produce fruits. The female trees are wind-pollinated by pollen from the male tree. And in a perfect world, there would be one male pistachio tree for every 9 female pistachio trees, and they would all be planted in a circle around him. As for telling the trees apart, male pistachio trees are generally taller, they hold on to their leaves a little longer in the fall, and they're generally more robust than the female pistachio trees. In terms of fruiting, pistachios grow in clusters like grapes. The trees need 7 years of growing before reliably producing a good yield. But once they get started, pistachios can produce fruit for over 100 years. And today is the birthday of the German-American naturalist, marine biologist, and Smithsonian collector William J. Fisher, who was born on this day, May 26th, in 1830. By the time he was in his 50s, William had made his way to Kodiak, Alaska. 10 years later, he married a native Alutiiq woman, and they stayed and raised their family in Kodiak. William's biography at Find a Grave was provided by the Alutiiq Museum and Archaeological Repository in Kodiak. It says, William collected hundreds of native artifacts for the Smithsonian during a time when the native culture was being impacted by Western culture. His assemblage and documentation provides us information today about Alutiiq history at that time. Well, in terms of his botanical legacy, digital copies of William's 1899 field book are now available online at the Biodiversity Heritage Library, and I put a link to it in today's show notes. William's field book is a modern treasure because he documented by hand almost 50 different plants that had been used by the Alutiiq people. Using Russian and Alutiiq names for the plants, William wrote about both the edible and medicinal aspects of these plants. For example, with his impeccable penmanship, William described how the cranberry was used. It's called brusnica in Russian or nichtat in Alutiiq. He wrote, "The cranberry is mixed with seal or whale oil and salmon spawn for winter preserves. Very plentiful." The cover of William's field book indicates that he collected specimens with a visiting botanist from the USDA named Thomas Henry Kearney. William also shared for posterity that he and Thomas had a bit of fun while they botanized. He wrote, "Notes accompanying the collection of useful plants made by W.J. Fisher at Kodiak in 1899. Dried plants with Mr. Kearney. Alcoholics in seed collection." It's time for today's Unearthed Words. Today's unearthed words come to us from the American author, writer of novels, poetry, and children's books, Louise Erdrich. This is an excerpt about Lily of the Valley from her book, The Beet Queen. Sita closed her eyes and breathed into her cupped hands. Before she left, she'd remembered to perfume her wrist with muguet, or lily of the valley. The faint odor of that flower, so pure and close to the earth, was comforting. She had planted real lilies of the valley because she liked them so much as a perfume. Just last fall, before the hard freeze, when she was feeling back to normal, the pips had arrived in a little white box, her order from a nursery company. She'd put on her deerskin gloves and on her knees, using a hand trowel, dug a shallow trench along the border of her blue dwarf iris. Then, one by one, she'd planted the pips. They looked like shelled acorns, only tinier. To be planted points upward, said a leaflet in the directions. They came up early in the spring. The tiny spears of their leaves would be showing soon. Lying there sleepless, she imagined their white Venus roots, a mass of them fastening together, forming new shoots below the earth, unfurling their stiff leaves. She saw herself touching their tiny bells, waxed white, fluted, and breathing the ravishing fragrance they gave off, because Lewis had absently walked through her border again, dragging his shovel, crushing them with his big, careless feet. It seemed as though hours of imaginary gardening passed before Mrs. Waldvogel tiptoed in without turning on the light. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Plantopia by Camille Souleyrol. This book came out in 2019, and the subtitle is Cultivate, Create, Soothe, Nourish. In this book, Camille helps us embrace houseplants, from their care and growing tips to botanical styling and health and beauty products. An editor at Elle Decor, Camille takes us on a tour of her favorite houseplants, hardy succulents, and cacti, along with flowering perennials. Promoting plants as a source of well-being and an enhancement to our homes, Camille's DIY projects are sure to inspire and up your houseplant game. With her detailed instructions and photography, Camille shows how to create ideal growing environments with terrariums and aquatic plant habitats. She also brings plants into the home with wreaths or geometric frames that feature vines. She even stages her dining room table with natural elements like leaves and dried herbs. This book is 160 pages of nature crafts, houseplants, indoor gardening, and home decor, and it's all designed to foster a sense of calm, harmony, and healing. You can get a copy of Plantopia by Camille Souleyrol and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $14. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the birthday of the little-remembered American poet Edgar Fawcett, who was born on this day, May 26th, in 1847. Edgar wrote some popular garden verses. He wrote, "All life, budding like a rose, and sparkling like its dew." And he also wrote, Come rambling a while through this exquisite weather of days that are fleet to pass, when the stem of the willow shoots out a green feather and buttercups burn in the grass. Well, my favorite Edgar Fawcett verses feature trees. Here's one about lovers speaking to each other using the language of birds. Edgar wrote, "Hark, love, while we walk beneath melodious trees. You'd speak to me in redbreast. I would answer you in wren." And finally, this verse by Edgar Fawcett is such a great reminder of the value of all green living things. We say of the oak, how grand of girth. Of the willow we say, how slender. And yet, to the soft grass covering the earth, how slight is the praise we render. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Maple Grove and Wyoming, Minnesota. If you want to read today's show notes, just head on over to thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. And don't forget that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. Last but not least, you can always get in touch by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.